Welcome back once again to another video. A good handful of you guys seem to like the top 10 fun facts / interesting fact type of videos on this channel. So you know what? They're fun, they're easy, I was in the mood to make one, so here it is. In this video, we will go over 10 interesting WoW lore facts, part 2. Number 10. Many of you guys probably don't know who the hell this guy is, but his name is Major Mattingly, and he was assumed to have died in the war against the Emerald Nightmare. Prior to the events of the Cataclysm, the Emerald Nightmare befell Stormwind, causing a majority of Stormwind's people to be unable to wake up, and worse, they began attacking those who were awake, believing them to be enemies. When Bro Baremantle, Thura, Tyrande, and Lucan Foxblood told Varian that they needed to find a Night Elf ambassador in Stormwind, Varian dispatched Major Mattingly to escort them. Upon arriving at their destination, however, they became utterly surrounded by Stormwind sleepers. When Thura raised her axe ready to cut down the citizens, Major Mattingly asked her, "Would you fight them if they were your people?" She replied, "Yes, because it must be done." He nodded, understanding her, but then quickly shook his head, refusing to attack his people, and then told the group to flee while he alone would fend off the sleepers. As the group was about to teleport away, they heard an incredibly terrifying and blood-curdling cry that was no doubt the Major's. But in WoW, we see that he is still alive, so even though he was ready to sacrifice himself that night and we thought him to be actually dead, it turns out that the Major is still alive and well. So if you see him, go by and slash him a salute. Number 9. When the undead plague befell the human kingdoms, Arthas was driven by such fury and anger at those responsible for killing his people that he pushed his men to the absolute limit, including Jaina. At one point they rode for days on end without a single break until Jaina began to tremble from fatigue and actually almost fell off of her horse. When Arthas noticed this, he became frustrated and asked Jaina how long she would need to rest. She almost said a couple of days, but before she did, she told him that she only wanted to rest for a bit and get something to eat. He frustratingly nodded, and literally after one bite of cheese, Arthas asked if she was done. She replied by saying no, at which his frustration grew, and told him that he was a paladin of the light, and he should remember his teachings because all she had seen him want was the utter destruction of whoever was responsible for distributing this plague. Arthas replied by saying that he only wanted people to stop dying, his people to stop dying. At this, Jaina understood his pain, and directly following this, Arthas asked if she was ready. She nodded. 2 bites of cheese. Fighting and horseback riding for days on end with the only break that Arthas allowed his men was 2 bites of cheese. Man, I would hate to be assigned under him. Number 8. Yetis in WoW usually keep to themselves even when an intruder approaches on their land or an enemy is in sight. However, once the Yeti is threatened or is angered, it becomes more hostile than a Magnetar. Nothing will sate its rage until its enemy lays dead before it or it lays dead before the enemy. But for being so hostile when provoked, Yetis are very solitary. Their nature is to keep to themselves and be alone except for when they need to hunt. The only time where Yetis will meet with one another is when they're trying to mate, which they will do so and raise their young as a family would. However, once the young reach the age of 9, which is considered as an adult in their race, the parents drive off their young to live their own lives, and then the parents leave each other as well. Number 7. When Arthas and his army marched upon Quel'Thalas, Sylvanas eyed the army and felt firm in her decision that even the undead monstrosities would not be able to bypass the elves' magical defenses. However, she did not live as long as she had by being overconfident. Sylvanas thought that it was the best course of action to end the threat right then and now, but her honor code forbade her from ambushing Arthas. So, she made her presence known by telling Arthas to go back from the way he came. But Arthas ignored the warning, and a battle broke out between the two sides. Eventually, so many of her forces fell that Arthas did not only raise them into undeath, but also began hurtling the mutilated bodies and hacked limbs back at Sylvanas on his Scourge catapults. Where a few minutes ago, Sylvanas felt the need to confront her foe on a fair ground by warning him of her presence and refusing to ambush him, she now was surrounded by the limbs and mutilated bodies of her fallen comrades while Arthas just stood there, grinning at her. Number 6. Before Neltharion was consumed by madness, and even before the dragon aspects were formed, the dragons we know today were proto-dragons, living a dangerous life of hunting and killing. This way of life got many proto-dragons killed since they began to develop rivalries with other dragons who wanted to show their superiority over their own kin. Malygos was one of these proto-dragons who developed a rivalry. One day, as Malygos was mid-flight to his lair, he was ambushed by his rival, a proto-dragon named Koros, and 2 other proto-dragons. However, despite being outnumbered, the future would-be-known Spellweaver held his ground, even freezing the wing of one of his attackers. But unfortunately, a 3 vs 1 fight was still a 3 vs 1 fight, even for the mighty Malygos. But as his attackers were about to bite into his throat, Neltharion, who at this time did not know Malygos, jumped into the fray, and together the two fought side by side, turning the tide of the battle and causing the ambushers to flee. This act by Neltharion saved Malygos' life that day, and for the foreseeable future, up until the corruption of Neltharion, the two dragons viewed each other as very close friends. Number 5. Most of you may be familiar with this wing of the Undercity, which experiments on live humans as if they were guinea pigs. In-game, despite the fact that the humans are caged and crying, it doesn't look like they are being subjected to anything that terrible. Well, what the Forsaken actually does with him is pretty graphic. In one point in time, during Wrath of the Lich King, Sylvanas instructs a Forsaken alchemist as well as his assistant to test some type of concoction on a human test subject. A Forsaken soldier then grabs a human woman by her hair and yanks it so that she can scream in pain. When she is about to scream, however, the green liquid conjured by the Forsaken is poured into her mouth. In mere seconds, she is struck by a set of seizures as blood begins to pour out of her mouth, ears, and eyes. Another subject is then tested, this time a Forsaken. This potion has a similar effect, and in a few minutes he too falls lifeless to the ground, covered in a pool of his own blood. Sylvanas then turns toward Farinel, the Forsaken alchemist that poured the substance into the prisoner's mouth, and tells him that this plague can never fall into the wrong hands, for the repercussions can be detrimental. It isn't ever confirmed, but it can be more than safely assumed that this concoction which was tested was the plague that was used by Putris at the Wrathgate. Number 4. Deathwing was one of the most powerful enemies that we have ever had to fight in the past. So powerful was he that we had to travel back in time to obtain the Demon Soul in order to defeat him. In order to do this, we had to gain access to the Caverns of Time, the domain of the Bronze Dragonfly, and the assistance of their leader, Nostormu. When the Aspects came up with this plan, however, Thrall saw it as way too risky, since taking an item from the past can possibly distort the timeways. So what he did was he offered the idea that perhaps it would be more wise to just gather every being on Azeroth and Outland that valued life and have them rally together in order to fight Deathwing. However, Alexstrasza responded by saying that Deathwing was so powerful now that even if they were to rally a legion of forces against the Aspect, it would only result in their destruction. No physical attack, no matter how powerful, could harm Deathwing. The only way to stop him was through the Dragon Soul. Number 3. In Legion, we relive the Black Temple raid on Illidan from his perspective. When we kill the NPCs that are supposed to be us, they say goofy things like, "Res please," and it's all good fun and games. However, the actual novel depiction of how we died is pretty damn gruesome. In the Illidan novel by William King, it goes over the raid from Illidan's perspective. In this fight, a tank charges him and blocks one of Illidan's slashes with his shield. The next slash from his warglaive, however, caught him in the throat, and blood immediately began to spill from the wound. Illidan then casted an immolation spell on a ranged caster. This spell was so strong that the caster immediately caught fire, his flesh being seared away and the heat so extraordinary that the eyes of the caster popped from their sockets. Then a rogue tried to ambush Illidan from behind, but Illidan sensed the poisons from the rogue's daggers before he could ambush him, and instantly turned around and grabbed the rogue by the throat, while at the same time casting another immolation spell. The rogue burned alive, struggling for life and air, while Illidan still held him by the throat, laughing. Finally, he threw him down after he was sure that the rogue could do nothing but die slowly, being burnt down to blackened bones. So the next time you run the Black Temple for the Warglaives, just remember how badly he kicked your ass at level 70. Number 2. When Kael'thas and Arthas engaged each other in combat in Northrend, one thing that threw both of them off from focusing primarily on one another was Jaina. At first it worked on Arthas' favor. The human prince threw Kael'thas off balance by enraging him at the thought that Jaina had chosen Arthas over Kael'thas, and the words truly hurt him. As the fights progressed, however, Jaina began to serve more of a tool for Kael'thas than it had for Arthas. As Arthas was about to deliver the finishing blow, and Frostmourne was about to cut Kael'thas' throat open, Kael'thas whispered, "She hates you," causing Arthas to be blinded by his fury and miss the killing blow as Kael'thas teleported away to safety. Number 1. After the events of Warcraft 3, but before the Burning Crusade, Illidan practiced a ritual while in his chambers within the Black Temple. This ritual allowed his spiritual self to detach from his mortal shell, allowing him to travel through the twisting nether towards Legion homeworlds. While traveling through the stars, however, Illidan came upon many worlds which were conquered by the Burning Legion, worlds which once held races that sought to drive back the Burning Legion but ultimately failed. One world showed alien weapons which were dismantled by the demons after it had failed to stop the Burning Legion invasion. The once beautiful mountains had been carved to resemble the physical features of the Nathrazim. Streets of cities were littered with decaying, unburied bodies that radiated with fell energy, while Infernals and other soldiers of the Burning Legion marched upon the land trying to detect any signs of life so that they may purge it. Illidan then traveled to another world that was once filled with water. However, now, the water was polluted completely by blood and poisons. The planet contained the corpses of creatures as large as whales, some floating in the water, and some were merely skeletons, all flesh having been stripped away from them. Along the bottom of the ocean floor, Illidan also saw gargantuan creatures the size of entire cities who lay dead, and alongside them, many other smaller aquatic creatures which had given their lives to try and guard the bigger gargantuan creatures. Illidan had fought, he had killed, and he had hated, but seeing this was something different entirely, and it actually sickened him.